Coming up on The World Today. The long-awaited Israeli-Palestinian ceasefire comes into effect. NATO chief reiterates need for peaceful resolution in the Ukraine-Russia tensions. Plus, Prince William says the BBC failed the late Princess Diana with interview deceit. A warm welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin today in the Middle East, where a ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas in the Gaza Strip has come into effect. The ceasefire began early today, bringing to an end 11 days of fighting in which more than 250 people were killed, most of them in the Gaza. Both Israeli and Hamas militants claimed victory in the conflict.
An elderly woman distributes candles to passers-by at Al-Aqsa compound in Jerusalem to celebrate the Israel-Hamas truce that took hold earlier in the day after the worst violence in years. Israel's bombardment of Gaza and militant rocket attacks on Israeli towns ceased after 11 days under an agreement mediated by Egypt.
This is a morning of freedom, a morning of victory. After declaring the ceasefire, we hope that God will give us patience, that we will remain in our homes, and that the occupation will be diminished.
But with negotiations to maintain stability still to be held, it's unclear how long it'll last. In Jerusalem, Israeli police fired stun grenades towards Palestinians who threw rocks and Molotov cocktails at officers outside the city's flashpoint Al-Aqsa Mosque on Friday, just hours after Israel and Hamas reached a ceasefire in Gaza. In the meantime, the UN Secretary General says it's essential for the wider international community to work with the UN to develop a plan to rebuild and strengthen Palestinian institutions.
I appeal to the international community to work with the United Nations on developing an integrated, robust package of support for a swift, sustainable reconstruction and recovery that supports the Palestinian people and strengthens their institutions. I stress that Israeli and Palestinian leaders have a responsibility beyond the restoration of calm to start a serious dialogue to address the root causes of the conflict. Gaza is an integral part of the future Palestinian state, and no effort should be spared to bring about real national reconciliation that ends the division.
However, U.S. President Joe Biden says the United States will replenish Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system that helped repel Hamas rockets.
In my conversation with President Netanyahu, I commended him for the decision to bring the current hostilities to a close within less than 11 days. I also emphasized what I've said throughout this conflict. The United States fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against indiscriminate rocket attacks from Hamas and other Gaza-based terrorist groups that have taken the lives of innocent civilians in Israel. The Prime Minister also shared with me his appreciation for the Iron Dome system, which our nations developed together and which has saved lives of countless Israeli citizens, both Arab and Jew. I assured him of my full support to replenish Israel's Iron Dome system to ensure its defenses and security in the future.
While the United Kingdom says it's committed to achieving a two-state solution to Israel-Palestinian conflict.
I think it's very good news that there has been at last a ceasefire in Gaza, and I think everybody deeply regrets the loss of life on both sides. And I think what the world wants to see now is dialogue, conversation, negotiation between the parties. And as you know, the UK remains firmly committed to a two-state solution. That's the only way forward.
Israeli aerial bombardment of the densely populated enclave killed 243 Palestinians, including 66 children. It wounded more than 1,900 others and damaged critical infrastructure and thousands of homes. In Israel, 12 people were killed and hundreds treated for injuries in rocket attacks that caused panic and sent people rushing into shelters. The violence erupted on May the 10th, triggered by Palestinians' anger at what they saw as Israeli curbs on their rights in Jerusalem, including during police confrontations with protesters at Al-Aqsa Mosque during the Ramadan fasting month.
Joining us now is Director General, Bolitag Center for Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, Professor Bola Akinteriwa, to discuss the ceasefire. He joins us from Yaba here in Lagos. Professor, great to have you.
Thank you.
So what's your take on the ceasefire? Are you optimistic that it will hold?
Well, I cannot be optimistic simply because I have always differentiated between hot war and cold war. The hot war is synonymous with the battles. The Cold War is about the war objectives. The war objectives have not actually been addressed. Ceasefire is just about shooting war. That is, you put an end to shooting and killing of one another. So if we are able to end the aspect of shooting war, it is in itself commendable and acceptable. But it doesn't mean an enduring solution to the reasons for the war itself, for the shooting battle. So I'm not optimistic. Reason one is because we have had many ceasefires in the past. Secondly, we have always known that the conflict has a... and expect that sooner than later, we may still have the same problem. The only thing is that for as long as the international community continues to manage the conflict, rather than seeking an enduring conflict solution to it, I don't think anybody who is objective can be optimistic.
How would you assess the role the United States played in this latest conflict and in bringing about the ceasefire?
Well, very characteristic of the Joe Biden administration. He has been towing a moderate policy position, which in itself is good. And that one is understandable. You know that the Americans are trying to shift emphasis on the Middle East to the Chinese. So in this case, you will discuss role there. I think that Joe Biden might have used the instrument of the Egyptians to intervene. That in itself is commendable, especially by engineering, encouraging, bringing others to bring pressure on Israel to accept ceasefire. But I can tell you, when the Americans are doing this, they waited until Israel has met its war targets, which is destroying as many strategic buildings, positions well. So coming to bring about ceasefire when Israel had already attained its objective, well, I don't know how anybody would want to assess that one.
So, you say you were not so optimistic about the ceasefire to start with. So what do you think, can be done to end this long-standing conflict?
There are many solutions in one. One, in the sense that a two-state solution has been agreed to internationally. But Israel does not show any preparedness to quickly agree to that. I think what to be done is that the Arab world should be encouraged not only to accept, recognize the state of Israel's right to exist in peace and within its own international borders, but also to give guarantees that the country will not be subject to unnecessary, unprovoked attacks. Secondly, Israel must be compelled to withdraw from the occupied territories acquired in 1967, but on the caveat that the Palestinians themselves will not evict the Israelis that are already living there. So they should be accommodated as an Israeli, a Jewish community in the occupied territories. You cannot force them out since they acquired the land as a result of spoils of war. More importantly, it is important that the mediators, including the United States, should stop, a sort of a duplicitous approach to it. Israel is creating many problems for the world by abusing international humanitarian law, engaging in many war crimes, but being protected by the U.S. The U.S. cannot be a mediator and at the same time having partisan interests. These are the reasons why the war there, the dispute, the misunderstanding has been recidivist. So to avoid that one in the future, if every mediating country, any intervening country is subjective and sincere, there will be solution to it. If there had not been solution to it, and in your very good question, asking for the assessment of a U.S. rules, when the U.S. wants solution to it, there is. They are able to compel Israel. If they do not want it, if they want it to continue, there wouldn't have been end to it. It is simply because the U.S. has stood like a rock of Gibraltar behind Israel. That's why Israel has been acting without impunity.
Right, thank you so much for your time today, Professor. Director General, Bolitag Center for Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, Professor Bola Akinteriwa. To other bilateral issues, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has underlined the importance of a peaceful resolution to resolve the escalation of tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Speaking after a Paris meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron, Mr. Stoltenberg called Russia's building up of troops near the Ukraine border a disturbing pattern of Russian aggressive actions, but that NATO remains committed to dialogues with the country. Relations between Moscow and Kiev collapsed after Russia annexed the Ukrainian region of Crimea in 2014, and Russian-backed separatists took control of a chunk of eastern Ukraine that same year. Tensions have flared again in recent months after the two countries traded blame for an uptick in fighting in eastern Ukraine. In return, Russia massed troops on its western border with Ukraine and in Crimea.
We also discussed the situation in Ukraine. Russia still has troops in and around Ukraine, more troops now than before the recent escalation. So we need a peaceful resolution, and I commend France's active role in the Normandy format. NATO remains vigilant because this is part of a disturbing pattern of Russian aggressive actions. At the same time, we remain committed to our dual-track approach of defense and dialogue with Russia. We will broaden our approach to security by helping to make our societies, infrastructure and supply chains more resilient, keeping our technological edge and tackling the security implications of climate change. And we will uphold the international rules-based order against the authoritarian pushback from countries like Russia and China.
Still to come on the program. Would you be interested in bathing with this French artisan Snail slime soap? We'll find out more after the break. Welcome back. In the United Kingdom, Prince William has accused the BBC of failing his mother, Princess Diana, and poisoning her relationship with Prince Charles. William's astonishing rebuke to the public broadcaster comes after an inquiry found that BBC journalist Martin Bashir used deceit to win a sensational 1995 interview with Diana, in which she disclosed intimate details of her failed marriage to Charles, and that the broadcaster covered up the deception.
I would like to thank Lord Dyson and his team for the report. It is welcome that the BBC accepts Lord Dyson's findings in full, which are extremely concerning. That BBC employees lied and used fake documents to obtain the interview with my mother, made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia, displayed woeful incompetence when investigating complaints and concerns about the programme, and were evasive in their reporting to the media and covered up what they knew from their internal investigation. It is my view that the deceitful way the interview was obtained substantially influenced what my mother said. The interview was a major contribution to making my parents' relationship worse and has since hurt countless others. It brings indescribable sadness to know that the BBC's failures contributed significantly to her fear, paranoia and isolation that I remember from those final years with her. But what saddens me most is that if the BBC had properly investigated the complaints and concerns first raised in 1995, my mother would have known that she had been deceived. She was failed not just by a rogue reporter, but by leaders at the BBC who looked the other way rather than asking the tough questions. In an era of fake news, public service broadcasting and a free press have never been more important. These failings, identified by investigative journalists, not only let my mother down and my family down, they let the public down too.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he is concerned by revelations around how a bombshell 1995 interview with Princess Diana was secured by the BBC. This follows an inquiry headed by former senior judge John Dyson, which concluded that journalist Martin Bashir used deceit and fake bank statements to secure the interview. The inquiry also found the BBC had been woefully ineffective in investigating his actions.
Well, I am obviously concerned by the findings of Lord Dyson's report. I'm very grateful to him for what he's done. I can only imagine the feelings of the royal family. And I hope very much that the BBC will be taking every possible step to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again.
The World Health Organization says official totals showing the number of deaths directly or indirectly attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic are likely to be a significant undercount, as about 6 to 8 million people may have died so far. The Global Health Agency revealed its statistics report estimates during a virtual press briefing in which it said that total deaths from the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 were at least 3 million last year, or 1.2 million more than officially reported. In fact, official estimates show that around 3.4 million people have died directly as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic by the month of May this year. Dr. Samira Azma, the WHO's Director General in its Data and Analytics Division, gave the update.
Preliminary estimates for global excess deaths attributable to COVID-19 for 2020 stands at 3 million, which is 1.2 million more than official figures that were reported until December 2020. This aligns with the similar estimates which all predict that the total deaths are at least 2 to 3 times higher than officially reported. So I think as the pandemic is still unfolding and we are seeing increased deaths in Latin America and in Asia, particularly in India and Nepal, pandemic is unfolding. So we will have better estimates, but I think we are safe to say on the lower bounds that what we are seeing today, 3.4 million deaths, this number truly would be about 2 to 3 times higher. So I think safely about 6 to 8 million deaths could be an estimate on a cautionary note, with a cautionary note.
Meanwhile, U.S. philanthropist Bill Gates is calling for more equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines across the world. He was addressing a G20 health summit being hosted in Rome. Mr. Gates said more than 80% of the first billion vaccine shots went to people in wealthy countries, with only 0.2% going to lower-income nations. His advice? Share dollars and doses. He wants more governments to share doses around the world more fairly and to commit to sharing over 1 billion doses this year through the COVAX scheme.
Into the pandemic. While amazing scientific advances have delivered vaccines quicker than ever, the task now is to ensure everyone can benefit from them. Many countries have made generous financial contributions and commitments to donate doses to support the critical efforts by the ACT Accelerator and its partners to deliver vaccines, diagnostics, PPE, and treatments. But this still has not been enough to bring COVID-19 under control. Even as the United States and Europe seem to be turning the corner, other countries are experiencing their highest peaks. If current trends continue, we will see continued devastating loss of life. It's great to see the G20's commitment to advancing an equitable response to the pandemic. Now is the time for global leadership, solidarity, and responsibility. We must ensure more equitable access to vaccines. More than 80% of the first billion shots went to people in wealthy countries. Only 0.2% went to low-income nations. If we do not close this immense gap, more people will die needlessly. There are two immediate actions countries can take: share dollars and doses. We need governments to contribute their fair share to ACT agencies and fill the financing gap in 2021.
And finally, on the program, many of us wouldn't go near slime even if offered $1 million. But those in the beauty industry know the value of snail slime in many products, which are collagen and elastin, which have anti-aging and skin healing properties. Well, one computer technician turned artisan has been harvesting slime from thousands of French snails he keeps in an enclosure in his backyard since December last year. He uses the slime, known as gastropod fluid, to make soap bars, which he sells in local markets. Damien Desrocher is one of only 3 artisans in the French town in France making the rare hygiene product in the country.
La végétation qu'on a, enfin tout ce qui peut servir de végétation, on leur donne, tu vois. Ça permet pareil de recycler.
What do you know? Well, that's a wrap on The World Today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jacqueline Rogers.